All right, as promised, Bob Costas is back. It's not like he ever went anywhere, but he has a new show on HBO that you need to check out, Back on the Record with Bob Costas. I wanted to have Bob on, the legendary sportscaster, for a few minutes to talk about that and just get caught up. One side story with Bob Costas many, many years ago when I was at KTAR. Bob gave me a half hour. We talked about all sorts of things. And he called me the very next day. And my phone rang at my desk, and it's Brad, it's Bob Costas. I want to apologize. I felt like I talked too much last night and didn't let you say anything. And I just was dumbfounded. Like, no, it was great. And he gave me his book at one time. So it's always good to catch up with someone who is into his craft like he is through the years. With that as an intro, what is the story with this new show? I can give it, but let's hear it from you.
Well, the story, Brad, is we're not reinventing anything. The title tells you that. Back on the Record. At the turn of the 21st century, for 7 or 8 years, I had a show called On the Record with Bob Costas on HBO. And I would have loved to have stayed with that indefinitely. But when the Baseball Network came along, they wanted me to be part of their programming. And at that time, the people that ran HBO said, you can't be in 2 cable places at once. We have to have cable exclusivity. And this was really a difficult choice because HBO is the gold standard in terms of quality, but the Major League Baseball Network was very appealing, doing games, doing historical pieces, doing interviews centered around baseball, which is the sport that I have the greatest affinity for. So it was a difficult choice, but I had to leave HBO. But now the landscape has changed. And HBO is perfectly okay with me continuing at the Baseball Network. Baseball Network was always okay with me being in both places. So I come back, and the show has all the same elements of On the Record. We used to do produced featured pieces on the Record, and we don't do that, at least we haven't, through the first 4 shows on the new program. I guess we're flexible enough to, if the situation calls for it, do that. But mostly it's long-form interviews, it's panel discussions, and it's extended commentaries by me, longer than I've ever had the liberty of doing before. The first 4 have all been somewhere between 4 and 6 minutes.
I go back on what you've done through the years, and I remember Costas Coast to Coast. Mm-hmm. This is when radio, there was no satellite, there was no Sirius, there was no cable, there was nothing. So it moves you from what you've done really well, where you would take a guest for an hour, sometimes 2 hours, and just say, okay, let's do this now at a platform where I can stretch, and I'm not having somebody say, no, we're tied in with this media partner, you can't talk about that, or no, we have to go to break, or no, we need to break this up. It's pretty unfiltered, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are some time constraints here, but it's HBO, so the subject matter is not in any way constrained, and there are no commercials. So when we say we're doing an hour show, we're filling very often 58 minutes and 30 seconds. It's all content. When you mentioned Costas Coast to Coast, which ran for about a decade from the mid-'80s to the mid-'90s, I'm pleased by the feedback I continue to get. It isn't as much as it used to be, but people will still occasionally mention it. And like a lot of things, it's a matter of timing. What was the landscape at that time? All sports talk radio didn't even exist until the late 1980s. Now there are hundreds such stations, plus, like you say, Sirius and other options. And there was no Sunday night football, and there was no Sunday night baseball. And so a lot of stations that carried local teams didn't really have any programming on a Sunday night. We gave them 2 hours of solid sports programming with marquee names for the most part. So we were on not just 300 stations, we were on most of the 50,000 watt stations that dominated their market and boomed out over multiple states. So if you started a show like that today, even if it was equally good, it couldn't make the same kind of imprint that show made. Everything is a function not only of how good it is, but when did it happen and in what context did it happen? And I was just lucky that most of my career landed in a space of time where what I was interested in, what my sensibility was, aligned with a very large portion of what the audience wanted.
Yeah, it's interesting how here you are doing Back on the Record now, and you're able to stretch out, as we talked about, in a space where, let's just focus on baseball. You've said you're a Bull Durham guy. you're not a Field of Dreams guy. And,
I know I like Field of Dreams, but if I was forced to pick one that comes closest to my view of baseball, Bull Durham would be it. And either way, I can't offend Kevin Costner because he's the star of both.
Yeah, there you go. But here in Arizona, the highlight of the offseason so far is that Brent Strom has come in as the pitching coach. We have a dilapidated stadium. We have an owner that really wants to see a work stoppage, in my humble opinion. They're not committed to winning over here in Arizona. They're in the National League West where they have no shot. So I want to take this down a path of labor stoppage and what you see coming here in the offseason, because there are so many baseball fans, Bob, as you know full well here with the Cactus League in the Valley and the Diamondbacks.
People who are closer to it than I am, people who really cover it day to day, the Ken Rosenthals, the Jeff Passons, people like that, John Paul Morosi, there's kind of a feeling that if it's not certain, it's highly likely that there's going to be some kind of work stoppage. And December 2nd, which is coming up fast, is the date when something's going to happen one way or another. The current agreement expires on December 2nd. Now, as far as fans are concerned, they don't really care, even if it stops free agent signings and puts a halt to trades or whatever. They don't really care until spring training rolls around, and especially when scheduled opening day, when games start, rolls around. So they could go through a couple of months of haggling, and as long as they play ball when people expect baseball to be back, they'll be okay. But there are so many issues up in the air, and so many different ways to look at baseball's revenues, with gambling coming in now and the new television deals and the Players Association. Even though players are well compensated, they want what they believe is a fair share of that. There are things on the table about the game itself, and the players and owners should see their interests there as coinciding. If the game is not pleasing as entertainment, as a lot of us who love the game are concerned that it's already moved in that direction, away from being the pleasing, leisurely pace that baseball always has toward its present plodding, lethargic pace, if they don't see their mutual interest in making adjustments that will remedy that problem, and if they hold out, if each holds out like this is a carrot, and here's the stick and the carrot in bargaining, instead of seeing it as something that really is best for the game and therefore best for all of them, then we could be in for an even longer tussle there.
They talk about wins above replacement to replace the current salary arbitration system, and fans are like, war. Where are we at on this? And that came out over the weekend, and in my emails today, fans are just disappointed. Like, I don't want to hear, as you said, we don't want to hear about this, but if this is what they're fighting over, does this make sense to you, Bob?
Well, I'm not sure it's the only thing they're fighting over, but war is one of the analytic tools. It's interesting. I want to see it. It's informative, but I don't think it's always definitive. Sometimes the guy who has the highest WAR in the league, because of the position he plays or whatever calculus is involved, you just know, he's a good player. I can name 10 players who had better years than this guy did. So sometimes I'm going to date myself, but I said this on the Baseball Network once to Brian Kenny, who is kind of the leading analytics guy. He carries that banner for the network. And I said, I'm going to quote Edwin Starr. War, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Say it again. But that's a 1970s thing, so that kind of dates me.
It's back on the record with HBO with Bob Costas. I want to go over to this book. I held up to you before we started the interview. Okay. So I've had this. It's an autographed copy from Bob, no less, in 2000. Oh, wow. I know, right? I mean, I don't know. You didn't charge me, but, there it is. It's your writing. So I want
to that should raise its value. I think it's available in the Amazon, out of print bin for about $1.99, but that one's probably worth at least $3.99 now. Yeah.
My daughter works at Changing Hands. She's said it's worth 99 cents. I'm just kidding.
There you go.
This book, I'm seriously here. You wrote it in 2000. Mm-hmm. Other than the numbers that are in this book, do you feel like this is mostly what you thought would happen when you penned this 20 years ago?
Yeah, I think it holds up pretty well. I think the basic arguments hold up pretty well. And some people misinterpreted. I used certain numbers only as an example.
Right.
I didn't say that the salary cap should be $80 million or $150 million. I use those as examples. And as the overall revenues of the sport grow, then those numbers should expand. So I think the premise, the basic fundamentals of what I put out there holds up pretty well.
Before I get you out of here, I want to talk about mental health in sports. I'm doing a lot of it out here on our platforms and seeing a gravitation by the audience. I had Ivan Mazel on with his book a couple of weeks ago. It's a terrific book. And others. You've been in this chair of Olympics and at the highest levels, and now people like Simone Biles and Michael Phelps and others. Bob, did we miss something back in the 80s, 90s, thousands? Executives didn't want us to talk about that. Do you see that as an emerging trend now where it is okay in mainstream to go down that path?
Yeah, I think it is. It's not confined to sports. In general, we're more open to talking about these issues that used to have a certain stigma attached to them or a reluctance from prominent people to acknowledge that they had those problems. I think that we're much more open and much more understanding about that. But I will say that I was never aware, I never encountered a situation, let's say in 1996 or 2000 around the Olympics or anything else, where I was aware that a person was struggling with mental health issues and some executive told me, don't address that. That never happened. But I think the reason it never happened is that people were reluctant to present that situation. You might have said the person has personal issues or they've left this team for this reason or that, but they were not more forthcoming about what those issues were. And now that stigma, even though there's some blowback, Simone Biles got it, for example, some people calling her a quitter and whatnot. I think that generally speaking, the society is much more receptive and empathetic towards situations like that.
Before I get you out of here, then last question. In your new program, Back on the Record with HBO, are there areas you want to go to that you've not stretched yourself and gone to before, or you just said, I'm not there yet? Are there some new spots you want to go to?
I think really it's more the amount of time. Maybe I could have done a 90-second or 2-minute commentary occasionally during the Olympics. And occasionally, even though most of what I talked about at halftime and on the NFL, 99% of it was just whatever was happening that week in the NFL or something. But even if I broached a subject like CTE, which I did a few times on NBC, I didn't have the breadth of time to do it. HBO gives you both the breadth of time, and not only are they not putting up barriers in terms of subject matter, they're encouraging you to go to it as long as you do it with some sort of credibility and with the kind of quality that they expect on HBO. So again, I don't know that I'm reinventing anything, but I hope that I'm just doing the best possible job I'm capable of doing. And certainly HBO gives you the platform to do it.
Bob Costas, Back on the Record, HBO with Bob Costas. Good stuff there. We appreciate your time and your insights. Stay safe, Bob. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Brad. Good to talk with you again.
We're back with more after this time out.